Hey there, horror fans! Welcome to episode 99 of Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. This week's guest is Timothy Bach, the writer of The Family Graves from Source Point Press. Picture The Incredibles, but instead of superheroes, the family is made up of monsters, and that gives you a good idea as to what to expect from The Family Graves. The 4-issue miniseries is getting collected in a trade paperback coming out on October 23rd, so be sure to pre-order it at your local comic shop. The Family Graves is also part of the partnership between Source Point Press and Comics Experience, so it was fun to talk to Timothy about how this book came together through that program. I've gone through a few courses at Comics Experience myself, and I got a lot out of them, so I'm always curious as to how others put the knowledge to use. Timothy can be found at his website, moonrisecomics.com, and on Twitter as @TDRBach. In other news, New York Comic Con is fast approaching. I am looking to set up some interviews from the convention floor, and we'll put together a special episode collecting them like I did last year and the year before. Last year, I also asked a number of creators what Disney movie they'd like to see reimagined as a horror movie. I'm not sure what my question of the con should be this year. If you have any suggestions, send me a note at james@horrordna.com or @JamesFerguson on Twitter. Now, without further ado, here is episode 99 of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, Timothy Bach. To kick us off, how would you describe The Family Graves to someone?
Well, The Family Graves is a sort of a monster family adventure done in a real classic style. The basic pitch I tell people is it's about a family of monsters that are trying to save the world from a vampire that's trying to devour reality.
Oh, that old story?
Yeah. Yeah. And, basically the main character is Phil Graves, and he's now a chemical engineer, recently turned unpredictably shifting werewolf. And when he finds these magical mirrors that are interfering with his experiments, it ends up launching the family on a race to capture as many of these mirrors as they can so they can stop a vampire who is trying to feed off of space-time. And they go through a bunch of, dimensions, and they travel and have a lot of adventures. But then there's also what it sort of asks the question if the family can hold together even as reality falls apart.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny that, they're fighting a vampire with mirrors, because, they can't really see him in there. Right. That's right. Like a funny little touch there. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of stuff going on in The Family Graves. What I'm most curious about is how did you decide upon the different monsters? It's not like, well, this is just a family of werewolves. It's, there's kind of every element in terms of like the classic movie monsters represented in terms of the family.
Right. Yeah, I think obviously I'm a huge fan of the Universal monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I love those old movies. When I was a kid, they used to be on TV like all the time, and staying up late and watching both the Universal monsters and then as I got older, the Hammer films. Mm-hmm. And so those classic monsters of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman and werewolves and all that kind of thing was big influence on me. Mm-hmm. As also is the Creature of the Black Lagoon. And when I was coming up with this idea of wanting to do this take on a family and of monsters, I was really struck by the fact that, if you're going to do a superhero team, you've kind of got to give them different power sets. Yeah. And so that was really kind of where it came from, this idea that, you've got the father and he's the werewolf. The son is a little fish boy, so he's kind of like the Creature in the Black Lagoon. The daughter is a siren, so she has these influencing powers. It's kind of like, tell people it's kind of like Jedi mind tricks. Mm-hmm. She can make people see things or make people do things. And then the mom is, I thought it would be too cliche if you went with like the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But I always loved Medusa, from that old Clash of the Titans movie and things like that. I thought that would be really great if we had this Medusa character as the mom. And then there's a little baby zombie. And he's kind of the comic relief, but I think he also kind of is the glue that holds the family together and as the story goes through. And so basically, I wanted to hit a lot of those classic elements, but not just be a retread. Yeah. Somebody pointed out to me early on that this was kind of like the Munsters meets the Fantastic Four. And I have to say, that was like totally unconscious when I was doing that. But I think it is a kind of a good hook for people to think about it in terms of that. You've got the Munsters, and they're all these different kinds of species or breeds of monster, and they kind of live together equally. But that's kind of the world that they live in, too. The world they live in, monsters and humans coexist mostly peacefully. Obviously, there are bad monsters, just like there are bad people. But it's not out of the normal to see monsters walking down the street along with people. And so it's kind of that that's just kind of that neat
Yeah,
world.
so I guess they're like the, I don't want to say superheroes of this world, but it's just kind of like, yeah, that's just what some people look like, and that's okay.
Right.
So it's
Right.
it's interesting. I mean, look, I get the log line then of the monsters meet the Fantastic Four. I mean, I know that wasn't the conscious thing to do, but like you can't beat a succinct log line like that, because like that instantly gives people an idea of what to expect.
Yeah.
The dynamic, like, so the family dynamic. I mean, I don't even know if I can, if you want to get into like how a werewolf and a gorgon can give birth to a fish boy and a zombie and stuff like that. I guess it's just kind of like what, like mutant powers could be set up.
Yeah, a little bit like that. The sort of the core concept in here is that if monsters have children together, so if a werewolf and a werewolf have a child, if they're going to have a werewolf child. If two monsters mix, they're going to have either a mix or it's sort of the luck of the draw. Dominant gene kind of thing. But the idea is that Phil was originally a human, and he's only recently become the werewolf, and we kind of talk about that in the story. The whole family is still kind of trying to adjust to that. And so when they had the children, he was still human. And in the background, I mean, we don't really deal with this in the story, but the idea is that if a human and a monster were to have children, it could be anything. And like you kind of said, like the X-Men, there's some sort of mutant gene in there that can just fire. So in this case, they have a boy who's a fish boy, and he looks kind of like the creature from the Black Lagoon, or Abe Sapien. But they have a daughter, and she looks like a regular human daughter, except she is a siren. She has sort of these telepathic powers. And then of course they had a baby zombie, and he except for being a zombie, he seems pretty healthy and normal. But I think that was that was kind of the putting the family together. I wanted there to sort of be this normalcy to them. But then, they could just be the family up down the street. I mean, Phil Graves he's the average dad who has, 2.5 children, and he's got a lawn that needs mowing. And, he also is randomly shifting into a werewolf. And that causes a lot of, sort of terror, but also a lot of kind of comedy in the family as they're trying to get used to this, because as a scientist, he messed with the curse. He thought, well, I know what to do. I can cure myself of being a werewolf. And he ends up making the curse something that happens basically anytime he can get upset, kind of thing. So it's a little bit more like the Hulk, but it can happen anytime, not just when he's angry. It just happens to him. And I thought, what I like about that idea is that it makes things unpredictable. If, the dad can explode at any moment, that adds just a level of tension to the story. And I think overall it is kind of a fun adventure story, but I mean, there's definitely is something in there about the dad and the kids trying to deal with this dad who could like freak out at any time because he's not always nice to the kids when he's the werewolf. When he's the werewolf, he is a wolf, and he doesn't really know how to control that. And, part of this story is him learning that.
Yeah, I think that really opens the door to, while the book itself is primarily like a little more upbeat and stuff, like that opens the door to all kinds of issues that you could explore in terms of that family dynamic. And it's like, like you could make a comparison to like, like an alcoholic that like, that's not your dad when he's like this. And I think they even say that in the book somewhere, that it's like, that when the wolf is not your dad, it's your dad is your dad. He can't control that. And it's like, they have this like really interesting conversation about like, well, but he is like that. There's a part of him in there. And like, if he's going to lash out, if he's going to attack us, like, does that mean dad wants to attack us? And it's like, this really interesting, and like, it's like I said, it's still a little more upbeat in terms of the overall vibe, but it doesn't like bring you down for anything. But it's just like, like that's a really interesting way to look at this, and someone dealing with this kind of tragic kind of element to their life.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for saying that. That is really kind of what it is. It is kind of under the surface, like if you had an alcoholic in your family or something like that. And one of the themes in the story is dealing with, are you a monster? What makes you a monster? That's one of Nori's concerns is, maybe we're all just monsters. And, you throw that idea that the dad seems to be this wonderful, loving dad, except when he turns into a werewolf, what is his true nature? And are we capable of overcoming what we think we are? So there's questions in there about of identity or of, destiny, those kinds of things.
And I think you sell the patriarch of the family Graves short a little bit, because it seems like he's basically like Tony Stark, but like a werewolf. And like, he's a multimillionaire. Yeah. He's inventing stuff. He's doing all this crazy stuff in the lab. So there's a like that. I mean, certainly can fund their various adventures and give them an excuse to suddenly jet set off and search for these mirrors all across different dimensions. So it's that is another kind of element. So it's funny to see how, you know, these different things. You have the monsters, you have Fantastic Four, you have like an Iron Man, a Hulk, like all these different Universal monsters, all these different pieces in it that like are clearly influences in some shape or fashion that all kind of went into your head and over the years, and it's like this is the amalgamation that comes out of it.
Yeah. That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, he's, you know, it's fun to make him, you know, he's an alchemical engineer, so alchemy is a science in this world, and he's figured out a way to, you know, I guess monetize that, as we would say today. He teaches at a university, but he also has all kinds of patents and things, and he's kind of the absent-minded professor. It was kind of like, as I was developing it, it's sort of the mad scientist trope, but then the mad scientist is also actually a werewolf kind of thing.
I mean, it's a fun hook that you can't deny with something like that. When you're like, also he's a werewolf, like, got it, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this is a comics experience joint, right? Like, you get now. Yes. I believe is the rest of the creative team all went through comics experience as well. Is that correct?
Let's see. Brian Atkins has been there, and he's taught some classes. Brian's the artist. I should point out right now. Yeah, Brian Atkins is our penciler and co-creator with me, and Dijo Lima and Anders Zarate both did colors on this, as well as we had some production assistance from Brandon Daniels, and then Marco De La Verda is the letterer and also does all the production work. And they're an incredibly talented team, and we wouldn't have this book without all their skill. But yeah, Brian has taught some classes with Comics Experience, and he helps like moderate the boards, and he posts like art tips and things like that. And Marco has also been a member of that. The other two, the colorists, have not been. But I've been a member of that community now for a long time. Back in the day, I took some classes with Andy Schmidt, who is a former Marvel Comics editor. I guess I should stop and say, for anybody who doesn't know what Comics Experience is, it's sort of an online school that Andy Schmidt founded. And like I said, he's a former Marvel Comics editor. He also edited at IDW with G.I. Joe, Transformers, a lot of those cool books, some of the Star Trek books and things like that.
A handful of things you might have heard of, little small things like that.
Right, and he is just a brilliant guy, and he has a wonderful heart for comics and for the community and helping people learn and advance on their own and all these kinds of things. And he's been really supportive of me over the years. The Comics Experience has now kind of branched out into publishing. We pitched a book and was like, yeah, let's do this. And so, we did that, and we found Andy has partnered with Source Point Press, which is this wonderful company out of Michigan that is just firing on all cylinders. I don't know if people are aware of like Dead End Kids and Ogre and Nora and Monstrous and some of these other books that have been coming out. They're just taking off, and it's really cool to be a part of that community of creators.
Yeah, I'm a big fan and a big advocate of Comics Experience. I took a couple of the courses as well. Cool. It's really just, it really opens your eyes. Like I've read books about comic creating and stuff like that, and obviously I read a ton of comics, but to see it and just like, oh, this is how you boil it down to the raw essence as to what this thing is, and it's just like, oh, this makes total sense. Of course, this is how you make a story, and it really opens the door. And then the fact that now that they're partnered with Source Point Press, like, first off, that publisher I think goes to something like 1 million different conventions a year. So like you've definitely seen, if you've gone to like any convention, you've probably seen them out there peddling books, and it's an incredible shop, and they do a ton of genre work. So it's really cool to see, a lot of sci-fi horror stuff come out of there. So I've been talking with a lot of creators that are setting up shop with them, and it's great to see like all these books popping up. Although it's funny, between them and Scout Comics, that I swear they're just following my Kickstarter history, because like every book I back, just like I see an announcement like, oh hey, we just picked this book. I was like, I just backed, like, what do you like? Yeah. Like I should start charging them a commission or something with the amount.
Yeah. Yeah, they are really great. Travis McIntyre and everybody there, it's been wonderful. And like you said, they go to so many conventions. That's one of the things that makes them so attractive as a publisher, because there's a lot of smaller publishers, and they are they're in Diamond, which is fantastic, because then that puts your book in every comic shop. But what's great about Source Point Press is they're at 2 or 3 conventions almost every weekend of the year, throughout the year. And they go to the biggest ones. They were at San Diego. They are at New York Comic WonderCon. They are at all the huge shows, C2E2 and all these things. But then they're also at small events that are in VFW halls and mid-sized cons that are, sort of local, but they're everywhere. And they're always out there selling your book. And I've been to, conventions of different sizes and been able to see them doing it. And they bring the same full show, no matter where they're at, no matter how big the convention is. And they just bring enthusiasm for putting people together with books that they want to read. And it's sort of it's not a high pressure sales tactic. But they're like, hey, what kind of books do you like? Well, here, let me show you some of our books. And they'll kind of find what books you like and then kind of steer you in a direction. And that's, as a creator, that's wonderful to have a team out there, because I can only go to so many cons, but to know that there's somebody out there pushing my book all the time. And then, by the way, we're in Diamond and we're putting our books out that way. And, that is just so cool, to be worldwide like that. And again, to have a company that is so passionate about creative stuff.
Yeah, and I think it very much becomes like a team effort, because there's this collective of sorts with them where it's you have the people that actually work for SourcePoint, but then there's just other creators that are at the show, and it's okay, cool, here's my book, but then there's also these other books here that you might like, and it's this weird, cool community where it's very welcoming, and you do find something for everybody in that kind of setup. So it's great.
Yep. Yeah.
So I guess the silly question is now that the dumb interview question is, well, all right, you finished this book and you're getting ready to release the trade paperback, which it looks like it's out in October.
Yeah.
Well, what's next? It's all right, you finished this thing, but I'm sure you have something else, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I have a number of projects in various stages. I've done I've done a few other books and things. And Brian and I want to get right back and do some more of the family graves, but he's committed to a number of projects. So he's also doing Final Street, which comes out through Devil's Due. With Scott Schmidt, who is a really talented writer out of Kansas City, and he's also working on some work with G.I. Joe. His brother, if you know Brian, his brother Robert Atkins was pretty popular a number of years ago on the G.I. Joe series, and he's coming back to G.I. Joe, and Brian is helping out with some of that too. I believe he's doing the inks. And so he's got that, and he's got a couple other projects that he's working on. But as soon as he gets those off his plate, we are definitely going to hit full speed on the family graves. We've already got the plan and kind of laid out an outline. We know where we're headed, and so we're hoping in 2020 to have something right back at there.
That's cool.
For people.
I mean, I'm sure the sky's the limit for this kind of setup, because there's no shortage of monsters and strange troubles that they can face with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that this particular arc is really sort of Phil's story. While the book is it's an ensemble piece. I think everybody gets great scenes and has and really matters and that in the story. But it really is kind of Phil's story. And what we want to do is kind of do arcs where we explore each character, and each character kind of has an arc, even though, again, it's always going to be a team book and that kind of thing. But I think what we like to do is, give Bianca an arc, or give Nori, give Lum an arc, and those kinds of things, and really explore this wonderful world we have through these all too human monsters.
Yeah, I think aside from the some of the ones that you mentioned, well, I guess let me back up. You mentioned things like the Universal monsters and things like that are influenced kind of growing up. Did you have a favorite, I'll read anything that's got a werewolf in it, do you have a favorite kind of monster or something like that sticks out for you?
Yeah, I think I love the werewolf. Any kind of werewolf or Wolfman. I mean, that is one of my favorite movies. Is the original Wolfman. But then also the Creature from the Black Lagoon. I love that, and I also again love the whole Fishman kind of thing. Anybody that does a story with that, I think that's just really fascinating. And I'm there every time.
Yeah, they stick out, and it's funny how well they hold up. As well, the Universal Monster series, I didn't see them growing up, but I got a deal on the DVD box set, and I threw them in there, and I'm like, wow, you could see the pacing. Yeah, okay, some of the effects can be a little hokey, but the overall story, the scares and stuff it's still creepy, it's still weird and unsettling, and it all just works still. So it's funny how they stand out, because you're far from the first person to tell me that the Universal Monster series was something that influenced them growing up, especially. It's funny how that is kind of one of the gateways. It's either you get in with those, or you get in with Stephen King or Goosebumps books, depending on your generational divide is where those things pop in. But it's an interesting kind of thoroughfare that kind of pops up in the genre.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely a touchstone. I mean, they're definitely some of the most, the greatest films, in the last 100 years or so, and they do. I mean, they do stand up. I mean, you can say, well, it moves a little slow here, or this or that, but ultimately, those stories, they have really good human characters. And I think one of the reasons why I was attracted to like the Wolfman all the time was, what's really neat about him is that he's just a regular guy, and he does not want to be a werewolf, and he's always pulled back into these things, and he wants to, yeah. Whereas Dracula is evil. I mean, he's down for all the killing, and he's always out there perpetrating some plot. And Frankenstein, although he's sort of morally neutral, he does do some bad things, and we don't really I mean, he drowns that girl. I mean, obviously he didn't know any better, but I mean, he's kind of a bad dude to be around, whether it's just a recklessness or what. But what I love about the Wolfman is, he doesn't want to be the Wolfman. He wants to be free of this. You see the same thing with the Creature of the Black Lagoon.
I think what I was going to say is the werewolf is probably in the unique perspective to know what it's like to be human, whereas the other ones like Dracula. I mean, he might have been human forever ago, but that's not him anymore, And then Frankenstein has only known this, so that understanding of like my life isn't supposed to be this way. This really is a curse, and like that really frames his suffering far differently. Right. I think that makes him this tragic character, and I also think it's something you can understand. I mean, I know people love vampires, and that's fine. I mean, werewolves are so much better, but people love vampires, but I can never really like identify with that as the way I could with the werewolf, where like he doesn't want to be that way, and plus, I mean, he's got that dark shirt buttoned all the way up. That's just uncomfortable, especially with all the fur. Like, there's a lot of problems.
Pleated pants. I mean, he's a snazzy dresser.
So, is the Family Graves your first foray into comics, or have you kind of dabbled elsewhere before as well?
Yeah, I've done a few things. Actually, with Brian, we've done a few different things together. One of our other stories is called Gargoyle by Moonlight. And that was a book that we just self-published. I have an imprint that I call Moonrise Comics, and people can find out about it at moonrisecomics.com. And that's just kind of where I publish some of my own stuff through. And we've had 2 issues of that. The first story is kind of like a mini graphic novel. And then there's a short story that we did real quick after that to follow up on it. And then, it's about a guy who has a curse that turns him into a gargoyle every night. And he's trying to figure out a way to undo that curse and take his life back. But he ends up kind of starting to realize that the world needs the gargoyle, and that his curse is kind of a blessing to the people around him, and so he struggles with that. So it's basically a big monster punching comic. That's basically what he does. He punches monsters a lot, but it's a lot of fun. I think there's some real good human moments there. I mean, Brian, again, if you've seen the Family Graves, I think you can tell that Brian does just a wonderful job with character acting. He makes these wonderful touching moments, and things work. And even though they're monsters, he somehow pulls out that humanity in them. And he did a great job with that in Gargoyle by Moonlight, because of course the character's all rock and kind of chiseled. But Brian does a great job of just having him emote and really seem like somebody that you want to root for.
Yeah, I mean the character expressions in the Family Graves are really solid stuff. Like you get a lot of emotion, both in like the family quality between the two, and then also just the monstrous elements of each of them. Like, so they're human but not in how they're expressive there. No.
Yeah, that's one of those things that Brian, he's just a really fantastic artist, and hope everybody gives it a look, because it's wonderful what he does, and he puts it all out there on the page. I mean, if you look at his backgrounds, if you look at his designs of the sets and the rooms, I mean, he puts so much thought into those things when he's putting something together, and it's just wonderful.
What is the collaborative process like between you two and the rest of the creative team there? Like, are you writing full scripts? Are you giving all right, like you get to a point, it's like, I don't know, there's a big fight scene with monsters in it. Like, how do you work together?
Yeah, well, like I said, we've done a couple of things before, so I think we have a really great working relationship. And kind of what I'll do is I'll kind of pitch him a story, and he'll give me some feedback on that, and then I'll kind of go back and write it, or maybe do a bigger outline kind of breakdown of the scenes, and we'll say, yeah, that's what we want to do here, that's what we want to do there, and then I'll go ahead and write it. And I do write full script, but then I trust Brian to make whatever changes he wants to make. As we're going through it, sometimes there'll be a 5-panel page and he'll make it 3, or maybe it's a 5-panel page and he makes it 7 because he feels like there needed to be an extra moment in there. He's really great at that pacing and figuring out what needs to be shown and stuff like that. So I may have a description of what the room should look like, but then, he produces some sketches and some breakdowns and things like that. And we're like, yeah, that's cool. And he might send me some reference, and then I might send him back a picture of reference, if it's like lab equipment or something, we kind of toss those things back and forth, and it works. But, it's one of those things. I mean, I know it's cliche to say that, he takes it and makes it better, but he really does. I provide kind of this rough outline. He breaks it out a little bit more, and then we kind of go back and forth and bring it, to full fruition. And then, of course, comics is a team sport. The colorists, they all add something. It's wonderful to have somebody take those colors and add life to it and add depth and just, really make the story come together. And then even the letterer does so much with the sound effects and, picking fonts and the way he does the balloons and all the little details. So it's really cool to have that all kind of happen and see what you've worked on come together after a long time.
Yeah. Speaking of little details, I'm flipping through the book as we're speaking, and I see in the Fish Boys room have posters for Gargoyle by Moonlight in the background.
Yeah.
It looks like some of your previous work. I was like, oh, that's now it makes sense. Okay, that's great.
Yeah. He also has some action figures on the floor there in the pile. You'll see little Gargoyle and a little Silas. Silas was the demon that he fought in the big story. And yeah, so we have a little fun like that. Brian does fun stuff like that. He puts little jokes in there and things.
Yeah, well, that kind of stuff is important for the creative process. Like if you guys can work together like that, it's so. Hello. Hey, sorry,
Hello?
we got disconnected there. It happened like right at the end of a sentence, though. I didn't even notice at first.
Yeah.
What I was just gonna say was that kind of collaborative process is important. Like you end up with a stronger product at the end of the day because you're collaborating so much. You're both on the same page, literally and figuratively, as you're going through everything and understanding. Like you're not just like, hey, here, draw this, art monkey. There's a lot more to it.
Right. Right. It's really important, I think, when you're making comics and you're going forward and you find people that first of all, you got to find people that you trust, and it's important to take their input and try to develop something that they want to do too. As we're developing these stories, we'll talk about like what kinds of things Brian likes or what kind of things might work here or there. And, if he doesn't really want to do that, then yeah, that's cool. Like we had a whole location for a story we're planning on, and it's based on a real life place, and I thought, that'd be really cool, and I think people will think that's really cool if we do there. I can't think of anything that's ever like been done at this place. And then as he thought about it, he was kind of like, I don't want to really be trapped into that design, and I don't want it to seem like we're trying to recreate this whole world. And he likes more to design those things himself. So, if you've got a stadium or a convention center or a main street, he loves to really just put the work in to design that himself. And so I'm like, yeah, that's cool. If you'd rather just make it your own, that's great. Because I'd rather have him sitting there on his screen working away at something that he loves and he's pouring all of his passion into, than in having it be, exactly what I, would want it, my original idea. You know what I mean? I think if you can get your talent to want to do something, then they're going to put in even better work.
No, that's the way to do it. And I'm glad. It sounds like you're definitely on that wavelength with him, with the rest of your creative team too. So that's great. I mean, it's only going to make better stuff. And the fact that you're playing in the horror / adventure space is pretty fun. That kind of stuff is what excites me. And I feel like the horror genre is so versatile in what you can play with, and it's like, you could do an adventure series, and it just happens to star monsters in it, and instead of a stretchy guy and an invisible lady, you could do that kind of stuff, and it's pretty cool. Like, and there are still definitely some scary elements, like the things that we talked about with the werewolf attacking his own family, but it's there's like more heart to it. You're more invested with these characters than you were if it's just like, okay, there's this guy and he's got a werewolf family, or he's got a weird family or something like that. Like there's more, I don't know, nuance to it to play around with the genre. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I think, yeah, when you make it a monster family adventure kind of thing, there's a lot of things we can do. We can explore dark family secrets. We can explore all kinds of places in this world. And of course, those mirrors, that lets us kind of go anywhere we want in space and time. Now they're not going to be sort of an underpinning of the series. I don't like when shows, they seem to every show nowadays seems to have to be like a conspiracy behind a conspiracy behind a conspiracy, and you're always sort of unwrapping it. And what I like to do is introduce those mirrors, and then maybe we won't talk with them in the next series. We won't even deal with them, and then maybe they come up again, because I think we've definitely set the scene that they have a place in the family's destiny, at least in one of the characters. But I think it'd be cool. Let's go away and do something else, and then come back to them, and not just make this about every week they jump through the mirror and have another adventure. So I want to take this in different directions. Maybe next time they fight kaiju, or maybe next time it takes place in Nori's high school. I think you're right. When you with horror, you can do so many cool things. You can have monsters and you can have scary stuff, but you can also just do stuff that makes you uncomfortable and just kind of creeps you out. There's a lot of different things you can do.
Do you have like a wish list then of other monsters or things that you want to tackle within the series?
Oh yeah, I think we want to do kaiju. I think that's right up there. I think it'd be fun to see what this family would do with that. I think it would be really fun to do something with like witches, and maybe explore vampires a little bit more, because the Gustav character is sort of a non-traditional vampire. He's more of a warlock, and becoming a vampire for him was more of a decision to try and prolong his life. So it might be kind of cool to see what vampires are really doing in this world, especially since monsters and humans seem to coexist mostly, again, peacefully. What are vampires doing out there in the world today that this family lives in? I think it might be really interesting to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, there's even just like the socio-political consequences of living in a world full of monsters. Like, right. Are they treated as another race? Are there subsequent things in there? Like, there's tons and tons of things you can explore with this, and we're just scratching the surface in this. I mean, you had 4 issues, so I mean, there's just scratching the the surface with this. There's so much more we can dig into.
Right. Yeah, I'd love to explore more of that.
So, I mean, for now, you have this trade paperback that's collecting the first 4 issues of the series. Hopefully there's more to come, but that's coming out, it looks like October 23rd, from what I could see online.
Yes.
So definitely, we'll put links to pre-order the book in the show notes, but definitely look to check that out. Pre-ordering helps, especially for indie titles, so definitely look out for that, folks, if you're a trade waiter. But otherwise, where are the best places to find you online?
Well, again, if people want to find me, they can find me at moonrisecomics.com or at TDR Bach on Twitter, Timothy Bach on Facebook. We're The Family Graves on Instagram, and you can find Brian at Brian Atkins Art, and that's across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other things. And you can also find more about our book at sourcepointpress.com.
Great. Yep, all the right plugs. So all this will be linked in the show notes as well. Timothy, this was a really fun chat, and I'm always happy to hear about what comes out of not only the indie scene, but the things like Comics Experience, where you did the work, and now you have a book that's going to be out on the stands. I mean, you already had a book that's on the stands, about the single issues, and now you're going to have that nice spine that you can put on the bookshelf there and admire. So congratulations on the upcoming release of this, and definitely hoping for more to come.
Well, and thank you. I want to thank you for promoting us early on. Every mention, every media contact that we make is wonderful, especially again for indie books. And I just want to thank you for encouraging newer creators on their creative journey. It means so much. Happy to do it. So I can't tell you. I mean, my inbox hurts a little bit for some times where I'm like, I will get to these books, I swear. But it's just finding to fit everything in there. But I'm happy to tout the horn for all independent creators. So that's fine. And if anyone else is listening, you're an independent creator, hop on the show, man. Hit me up, and that's I need more guests. That's what we're out here to do as well. So definitely do that. But I think that can do it. That'll wrap it up for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I've been James Ferguson with my guest Timothy Bach. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com.
We have been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. If you like the show, please help me out by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. I am always looking for new guests, so if you have a horror comic, I want to hear from you. I don't care if you're a seasoned pro or a first-timer. You could find me on Twitter as @JamesFerguson or via email at james@horrordna.com. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and so much more. Check us out at horrordna.com and @horrordna on Twitter.